My son's wife called security on me at their baby shower until the owner walked in. It was me. The look on her face when she realized who actually owned the Grandview Event Center will haunt me forever, but not as much as what led to that moment of reckoning. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Let me back up and tell you how a simple grandmother's desire to attend her first grandchild's baby shower turned into the most humiliating and ultimately satisfying day of my life. My name is Patricia Holloway, and I own a chain of 7 luxury event venues across Riverside County. At 62, I've built an empire from nothing, starting with a small catering business 30 years ago and expanding into premium event planning and venue management. The Grandview Event Center is my crown jewel, a stunning 15,000 square foot facility overlooking the mountains with crystal chandeliers, marble floors, and gardens that have hosted everything from celebrity weddings to corporate galas. But on that particular Saturday afternoon in October, I wasn't there as the owner. I was there as a grandmother, clutching a carefully wrapped gift and wearing my best dress, hoping to celebrate the upcoming arrival of my first grandchild. What I got instead was a masterclass in humiliation, public embarrassment, and family betrayal that would change everything between my son Timothy and me forever. The events that unfolded that day revealed truths I never wanted to face about my daughter-in-law Vanessa, my son's spine, or lack thereof, and the price of trying to buy love and acceptance from people who see you as nothing more than an inconvenience. It was a day that started with hope and ended with a revelation so shocking that it would tear my family apart before ultimately bringing justice in the most unexpected way possible. I had been looking forward to this baby shower for weeks. Timothy, my only child, had married Vanessa Thornfield 2 years ago in what I can only describe as a whirlwind romance. Vanessa was beautiful, charming when she wanted to be, and came from what she called old money in Eastbrook Hills. From the moment Timothy introduced her, I knew she looked down on me. There was something in her eyes, a calculation, a coldness that she masked with perfect manners and a practiced smile. But I love my son, and I wanted to love his wife. I wanted to be the kind of mother-in-law who had a warm relationship with her daughter-in-law, who could spoil her grandchildren and be included in family traditions. So I bit my tongue when Vanessa made subtle comments about my nouveau riche lifestyle, my taste in decoration, or my choice of restaurants. I smiled when she corrected my grammar or explained cultural references as if I were some backwoods hillbilly who'd never seen the inside of a museum. The pregnancy announcement had come 6 months earlier during what was supposed to be a family dinner at their house in Willowbrook Estates, an exclusive gated community about an hour from my main residence. I had been so excited, immediately offering to help with anything they needed, nursery furniture, baby clothes. I even suggested I could host the baby shower at one of my venues. The offer was declined politely but firmly. Vanessa had already made arrangements, she said, at an appropriate venue that would suit their social circle. I should have seen the warning signs then. The way Vanessa's eyes narrowed slightly when I made the offer, the way Timothy suddenly became very interested in his dinner plate. The subtle but unmistakable message that my venues, my taste, my world wasn't good enough for their celebration. But love makes you blind, and grandmotherly excitement makes you even blinder. For weeks leading up to the shower, I had tried to be helpful. I offered to contribute financially, to help with planning, to bring food or flowers. Each offer was politely declined with excuses that sounded reasonable on the surface but felt increasingly dismissive. "Oh, we have everything covered, Patricia. Thank you, though. The venue has very specific catering requirements. We're keeping the guest list quite intimate." The message was clear. You're not really part of this planning process, but will tolerate your presence at the actual event. I had spent days choosing the perfect gift, an antique sterling silver baby cup engraved with the family name, something that could become an heirloom. I had it beautifully wrapped at Pemberton's, the most exclusive shop in downtown Riverside, with hand-tied ribbons and custom paper. I chose my outfit carefully, a tasteful navy dress with pearls, elegant but not attention-seeking. I wanted to blend in, to be the perfect grandmother who enhanced their special day rather than detracting from it. The drive to the venue that morning filled me with nervous anticipation. I practiced conversations in my head, imagined holding my future grandchild, pictured the moment when Vanessa would see that I could fit into her world if she'd just give me a chance. I had even prepared a short speech in case they asked me to say something, though I suspected they wouldn't. What I couldn't have prepared for was walking into what would become a nightmare of social humiliation, family betrayal, and public embarrassment that would culminate in the most shocking revelation of my life. A revelation that would expose not just Vanessa's true character, but the depths of deception and manipulation that had been poisoning my relationship with my son for 2 years. Because as I walked into that baby shower carrying my gift and my hopes for a better relationship with my daughter-in-law, I had no idea that I was walking into my own venue, about to be treated like an unwelcome intruder in a building that I owned by people who were about to learn exactly who they were dealing with. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Let me establish something important before I continue this story. When I say I own luxury event venues, I don't mean I rent out church basements or community centers. I mean I built a multi-million-dollar hospitality empire from absolutely nothing, and I know every single detail about how high-end events should be run, how guests should be treated, and what genuine hospitality looks like versus manufactured exclusivity. My journey started 30 years ago when I was a single mother working 3 jobs to support Timothy after his father abandoned us when Tim was just 2 years old. I was cleaning offices at night, waitressing at a diner during the day, and doing catering prep work on weekends just to keep food on the table and a roof over our heads. We lived in a cramped apartment in Millfield Heights, the kind of neighborhood where you triple check your locks and don't walk alone after dark. But I had a dream and an unshakable work ethic that my own mother had instilled in me. During those weekend catering gigs, I noticed how poorly most events were managed. Guests waiting too long for service, cold food, disorganized staff, venues that looked beautiful but functioned terribly. I started taking notes, studying what worked and what didn't, learning the business from the ground up while scraping together every penny I could save. My first break came when the catering company I worked for went bankrupt, leaving a bride 3 weeks before her wedding with no food service. I convinced her to let me handle it independently, used my entire savings of $1,200 to buy supplies, and pulled off a flawless reception for 150 people using equipment borrowed from restaurant contacts and help from other struggling caterers I'd befriended. Word spread quickly in Riverside County's tight-knit social circles about the woman who had saved the Henderson wedding. Within 2 years, I had built a small but respected catering business called Holloway Hospitality. I reinvested every dollar back into equipment, staff training, and building relationships with vendors. I studied successful event planners, took business courses at the community college, and slowly began to understand not just how to serve good food, but how to create experiences that people would remember forever. The first venue came 10 years later. The old Riverside Manor was going into foreclosure, a beautiful 1920s estate that had been neglected and mismanaged by its previous owners. I saw potential where others saw problems. I took out every loan I could qualify for, mortgaged my small house, and bought that property for a fraction of its value. Then I spent 2 years and every waking hour restoring it to its original grandeur while learning property management, historical preservation, and high-end hospitality standards. That single venue launched everything else. The Riverside Manor became known as the most exclusive wedding destination in the county. Celebrities started booking it there, corporate executives held their events there. I charged premium prices because I delivered premium experiences. Not just beautiful spaces, but flawless service, attention to every detail, and the kind of hospitality that makes people feel genuinely valued rather than merely tolerated. Over the next 20 years, I acquired 6 more properties. Each one was a strategic investment in a different market segment. The Grandview Event Center was my newest and most ambitious project. A completely custom-built facility designed specifically for luxury events, with state-of-the-art everything and a price point that reflected its exclusivity. It took 3 years to build and cost more than most people make in a lifetime, but it represented the pinnacle of what I had learned about creating truly exceptional experiences. By the time of Timothy's baby shower, Holloway Hospitality managed over 400 events per year across 7 venues, employed 85 full-time staff members, and generated annual revenues that put me firmly in the top 1% of business owners in the region. I wasn't just successful, I was a recognized expert in luxury event management, someone who had been featured in industry magazines and consulted with hospitality businesses across 3 states. More importantly for this story, I knew every single staff member at every one of my venues personally. I knew their names, their families, their work histories. I conducted training sessions myself, established our service standards personally, and had fired people for treating guests with anything less than absolute respect and professionalism. My venues succeeded because I demanded that every single person who walked through our doors be treated with dignity, regardless of who they were or how much money they spent. I also knew every inch of the Grandview Event Center because I had been involved in designing and building it. I knew which suppliers we used, which security company we contracted with, how our booking system worked, and what our policies were regarding guest conduct and venue access. I knew these things because successful business ownership requires hands-on knowledge of every operational detail, especially when your reputation depends on flawless execution. So, when I tell you what happened at that baby shower, understand that I'm not just a hurt grandmother telling a one-sided story. I'm someone who built a career on understanding exactly how events should be managed, how guests should be treated, and what constitutes appropriate versus inappropriate behavior in a professional hospitality setting. I'm someone who had never, in 30 years of business, experienced anything remotely similar to what Vanessa and her friends put me through that day. My expertise in this industry, my knowledge of proper hospitality standards, and my familiarity with my own venue's operations would become crucial to understanding not just what went wrong that afternoon, but why what happened next was so completely unprecedented in my decades of experience managing luxury events. To understand what happened at that baby shower, you need to understand the complex dynamics between my son Timothy, his wife Vanessa, and myself. These relationships didn't become toxic overnight.
They deteriorated gradually over 2 years of subtle manipulations, class warfare, and a fundamental misunderstanding of what family should mean. Timothy James Holloway is my only child, and for most of his life, we had an incredibly close relationship. As a single mother building a business, I had to bring him with me to many work events when he was young. He grew up understanding the value of hard work, watching me transform from a struggling waitress into a successful businesswoman. Timothy was my motivation for everything. Every long night, every financial risk, every sacrifice I made was so he could have opportunities I never had. He's brilliant, graduating summa cum laude from Stanford with a degree in computer engineering, then earning his MBA from Northwestern. At 34, he works as a senior software architect for a major tech company, making more money in a year than I made in my first decade of business. But success changed him, or perhaps revealed aspects of his character that I had been too loving to see clearly. The Timothy who grew up helping me fold napkins for events and learned to treat service workers with respect gradually became someone who seemed embarrassed by his humble origins. He started using phrases like, "When I was growing up, we didn't have much," in a way that suggested shame rather than pride in how far we'd come. He started correcting my grammar in public, suggesting more sophisticated restaurants when we went to dinner, and generally treating our shared history as something to be politely overlooked rather than celebrated. I told myself this was natural. Successful people often distance themselves from their past struggles. I was proud of his achievements and didn't want to hold him back socially or professionally. But looking back, I can see that his growing discomfort with his background made him vulnerable to someone like Vanessa, who represented everything he thought he wanted to become. Vanessa Thornfield entered our lives like a perfectly choreographed performance. 28 years old, stunningly beautiful in that effortless way that comes from good genetics and expensive maintenance. She claimed to be from old money in Eastbrook Hills, with a family history involving banking, real estate, and various philanthropic foundations. Her father was supposedly deceased, lost in a sailing accident when she was in college, and her mother lived in France, managing the family's European investments. Everything about Vanessa seemed designed to impress Timothy and, by extension, to highlight everything I wasn't. She spoke fluent French, could discuss wine vintages and art history with equal expertise, and had attended an exclusive private college that cost more per year than most people's salaries. She dressed impeccably, always knowing exactly which designers were appropriate for each occasion, and had the kind of social confidence that comes from believing you belong in any room you enter. But there were things about Vanessa that bothered me from the beginning. Subtle inconsistencies that my business instincts picked up on even when my motherly desire to welcome her overrode my concerns. Her stories about her family never quite aligned. She claimed her mother was in France, but could never provide specific details about where. She said she'd grown up attending charity galas and country club events, but seemed unfamiliar with local social organizations that old Eastbrook Hills families would naturally be connected to. More troubling was how she interacted with service staff. At restaurants, she would barely acknowledge servers, speaking about them rather than to them, as if they were invisible. She had this way of looking through people she considered beneath her notice. Housekeepers, valets, shop assistants that reminded me of the worst kind of entitled customers I'd occasionally encountered in my business. But she was always charming and gracious to Timothy, and when she turned that charm on me, I wanted desperately to believe it was genuine. The engagement happened quickly, just 8 months after they started dating. Timothy proposed with a ring that cost more than most people's cars, and Vanessa immediately began planning what she called an intimate ceremony for 200 guests at the Eastbrook Hills Country Club. I offered to help with costs or use one of my venues, but was politely told that the country club had been booked years in advance and that the wedding needed to maintain certain social expectations. I should have been hurt, but instead I convinced myself that this was about giving Timothy the wedding he deserved, helping him fully establish himself in his new social circle. I wrote a check for $50,000 toward wedding expenses and told myself that supporting their choices was more important than having my feelings acknowledged. The wedding itself was beautiful, but felt strangely impersonal. I knew almost no one there except Timothy's college friends and a few work colleagues. Vanessa's side was filled with people who seemed to know each other well, but treated me with polite indifference. I was seated at a table with distant relatives and felt more like a required guest than the mother of the groom. During the mother-son dance, Timothy whispered an apology for how formal everything was, promising that things would be different once they settled into married life. But things weren't different. If anything, they became more strained. Family dinners became infrequent and increasingly awkward. Vanessa would make subtle comments about my house being charming in its own way, or suggest that my business success was admirable for someone from your background. She had this talent for delivering insults wrapped in compliments, always with just enough plausible deniability that calling her out would make me look petty and oversensitive. Timothy began parroting some of her attitudes. He started suggesting that I might want to refine my decorating style or consider taking some etiquette classes to expand my social comfort zone. He questioned some of my business decisions, implying that my success was more about timing and luck than skill or intelligence. Most painfully, he began excluding me from decisions about their life together, treating me more like a distant relative than the mother who had sacrificed everything to give him opportunities. The pregnancy announcement 6 months ago had given me hope that becoming grandparents might bridge these growing gaps. I imagined that Vanessa might soften once she became a mother, that Timothy might remember the close relationship we used to have, that the baby might give us common ground for rebuilding our family bonds. I pictured myself as the kind of grandmother who could provide wisdom and support, who might finally find a way to connect with my daughter-in-law through our shared love for this child. Instead, the pregnancy seemed to accelerate Vanessa's efforts to establish herself as the primary authority on family matters. She made it clear that her ideas about child-rearing, education, and family traditions would take precedence. She began speaking about our family values in a way that seemed to exclude influences from Timothy's side. Most tellingly, she started referring to the baby as belonging to the Thornfield line, as if Timothy's paternity was secondary to her genetic and cultural contribution. By the time the baby shower invitation arrived, a formal card addressed to Mrs. Patricia Holloway rather than Grandma or even Mom, I realized that my role in their lives had been systematically diminished to that of a peripheral relative whose presence was tolerated rather than welcomed. But I still held on to hope that once the baby arrived, once Vanessa experienced the challenges and joys of motherhood, we might find ways to build a genuine relationship based on our shared investment in this child's well-being. I had no idea that the baby shower would be the day when all pretenses finally fell away, when Vanessa's true feelings about me would be revealed in the most humiliating way possible, and when I would discover just how far my son was willing to go to avoid confronting the woman he had married. The Grandview Event Center had never looked more stunning than it did that October afternoon. And the irony of that fact would become crystal clear within hours. As I pulled into the circular driveway at 2:30 p.m., 30 minutes after the shower's official start time, I had deliberately arrived late to avoid any awkward early moments. I felt a surge of pride seeing my venue in full celebration mode, even though I had no idea it was my venue being used. The exterior grounds were perfectly maintained, as I demanded from my landscaping crew. The autumn flowers were in full bloom, with carefully arranged displays of chrysanthemums, ornamental cabbage, and seasonal foliage, creating a warm, welcoming atmosphere. The fountain in the center of the circular drive sparkled in the afternoon sunlight, and the building itself looked magnificent with its honey-colored stone facade and elegant architectural details that I had spent months perfecting during the design phase. Valets in crisp black uniforms were efficiently handling the arrival of luxury vehicles, BMWs, Mercedes, Lexus sedans, and even a few exotic sports cars that suggested Vanessa's guest list included some genuinely wealthy attendees. These were my valets, young men I had personally interviewed and trained, though none of them showed any recognition as I handed over my keys. I was just another guest to them, which was exactly how it should be from a professional standpoint, though it felt strange to be anonymous at my own property. Walking through the main entrance, I was struck by how perfectly my staff had executed the event setup. The lobby area, with its soaring 20-foot ceilings and Italian marble floors, had been transformed into an elegant reception space. Soft jazz music played from the hidden sound system I had invested heavily in, creating the perfect ambient atmosphere. The lighting was adjusted to that golden hour glow that made everyone look beautiful and created an atmosphere of warmth and celebration. The main ballroom had been configured for approximately 60 guests, though I counted closer to 45 people as I scanned the room. Round tables for 8 were draped in ivory linens with soft blue accents, each centerpiece featuring white hydrangeas and baby's breath arranged in crystal vases that I recognized as part of our premium package. The floral arrangements were elegant but not overwhelming, allowing conversation to flow naturally while providing visual interest. At the far end of the ballroom, a gift table displayed an impressive collection of wrapped packages, from small jewelry-sized boxes to large items that were clearly major baby furniture pieces. The presentation was flawless, with gifts arranged by size and color in a way that created visual harmony while making each contribution feel important. A beautiful bassinet served as the centerpiece, overflowing with smaller gifts and cards, positioned perfectly for photographs. The catering setup showcased the full capabilities of my facility's kitchen and service team. Instead of the typical baby shower finger foods, Vanessa had clearly opted for our premium brunch package. The buffet featured stations with made-to-order omelets, carved ham and turkey, fresh fruit displays that looked like artwork, and an impressive array of pastries that I knew came from our exclusive partnership with Laurent's Bakery downtown. Coffee service included our top-tier espresso bar setup, complete with a barista preparing individual drinks to order. A separate dessert station featured what was obviously a custom cake from our preferred vendor, a 3-tier creation decorated with delicate sugar flowers and elegant script announcing Baby Thornfield. Surrounding the main cake were matching cupcakes, chocolate-covered strawberries, and other petit fours arranged in crystal stands that caught the light beautifully. The whole display represented several $1,000s worth of premium catering that someone was paying handsomely for. The guests themselves were exactly what I would have expected from Vanessa's social circle. The women were impeccably dressed in the kind of expensive casual wear that manages to look effortless while costing more than most people's monthly rent. Designer handbags, subtle but expensive jewelry, and the kind of perfectly styled hair that only comes from high-end salons. The men, fewer in number, but equally polished, wore blazers and dress slacks that screamed quality tailoring. Everyone seemed to know each other well, with conversations flowing easily between groups as people moved naturally around the room. There was an air of comfortable wealth and social confidence that suggested these were people accustomed to attending exclusive events. They admired the venue appreciatively, making comments about the gorgeous space and wondering aloud how Vanessa had managed to book such an exclusive location. The service was flawless, as I would have expected from my team. Servers moved efficiently through the crowd, ensuring glasses remained full and that the buffet station stayed properly stocked and attractively arranged. The waitstaff were dressed in the crisp black and white uniforms I had chosen specifically for their professional appearance, and they maintained the perfect balance of attentiveness without intrusion that I had spent years training them to achieve.
Vanessa herself looked radiant, wearing a flowing powder blue dress that was clearly maternity designer wear and probably cost more than most people's car payments. Her hair was styled in an elegant updo that showed off diamond earrings, and she moved through the room with the gracious confidence of someone completely in her element. She accepted congratulations and admiration with practiced ease, posing for photographs and gracefully managing the attention that naturally flows to the guest of honor at such events. Timothy stood near her, handsome in a navy blazer and khakis, playing the role of proud, expectant father with apparent comfort. He was engaged in conversations about everything from nursery preparations to college funds, clearly enjoying the attention and good wishes from their social circle. When people asked about the baby's due date or whether they had chosen names, he answered with the kind of easy confidence that suggested he was completely comfortable in this environment. The atmosphere was exactly what a successful baby shower should be: warm, celebratory, elegant without being ostentatious, and filled with the kind of genuine happiness that comes when people who care about each other gather to celebrate new life. The space itself contributed to this atmosphere perfectly, with every detail designed to make guests feel welcomed and comfortable, while providing a backdrop beautiful enough to make the occasion feel truly special. As I stood in the doorway taking in this scene, holding my carefully chosen gift and wearing my carefully selected outfit, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. Pride in how beautiful my venue looked and how professionally my staff was executing the event. Nervous anticipation about finally having a chance to connect with Vanessa in a relaxed social setting. Hope that this celebration might mark a turning point in our relationship, giving us common ground through our shared excitement about the coming baby. I had no way of knowing that within the next hour, this perfect scene would transform into a nightmare that would expose the true nature of the relationships I thought I understood, reveal depths of disrespect and manipulation I had never imagined possible, and culminate in a revelation that would change everything about how these people saw me and how I saw them. But at that moment, standing in the doorway of my own venue without realizing it, watching my son and daughter-in-law celebrate with their friends in the space I had created, everything looked absolutely perfect. The first sign that something was wrong came within minutes of my arrival, though at the time I dismissed it as simple oversight. As I approached the gift table to place my carefully wrapped present among the others, I noticed Timothy engaged in animated conversation with a couple I didn't recognize. When he spotted me, instead of the warm greeting I expected, his expression shifted to something that looked almost like panic, before quickly settling into forced politeness. "Mom, hi," he said, stepping away from his conversation and walking over to me with what I can only describe as reluctant duty. "I'm glad you could make it." The words were right, but his tone lacked any genuine warmth. It was the kind of greeting you might give to a distant relative whose presence you tolerate rather than welcome. Behind him, I caught Vanessa watching our interaction with an expression I couldn't quite read, calculating, perhaps, or mildly annoyed. "Timothy, sweetheart, this is such a beautiful venue. How did you find this place? It's absolutely stunning."
It felt strange complimenting my own work without knowing it, but the genuine admiration in my voice was real. The space truly was magnificent, and seeing it used for my family's celebration should have filled me with joy. Timothy's response was oddly evasive. "Oh, Vanessa handled all the arrangements. She has connections to these kinds of places." The way he said, "these kinds of places," suggested something exclusive and expensive, somewhere that required special access or social credentials to book. It made me wonder about the cost and who was paying for such an elaborate venue. But I didn't want to seem nosy by asking directly. When I approached Vanessa to offer my congratulations and compliment her on the beautiful event, her response was polite, but notably cool. "Patricia, how nice that you could join us," she said, the emphasis on "join us," making it sound like I was a late addition to the guest list rather than family. "I do hope you'll find people to talk with. Most of our friends won't know you, of course, but I'm sure you'll manage to find some common ground with someone." The comment was delivered with a smile, but there was something dismissive about it that made my stomach tighten, as if she had prepared her guests for my attendance by explaining that Timothy's mother came from different circumstances. As I moved through the room trying to mingle, I began to notice other subtle signs that my presence wasn't entirely welcome. Conversations seemed to pause slightly when I approached groups, with people offering polite smiles before resuming their discussions at a slightly lower volume. When I introduced myself as Timothy's mother, the responses were cordial but brief, lacking the warmth and interest that usually accompanies meeting the family of someone being celebrated. One particularly uncomfortable moment came when I overheard part of a conversation between two women near the dessert table. "Didn't realize Timothy's background was so different from Vanessa's," one was saying. "She's handling it gracefully, of course, but it must be challenging to navigate those kinds of family dynamics." The other woman murmured agreement, adding something about social integration that I couldn't quite catch. The implication was clear. I was seen as a social liability that Vanessa was managing, rather than a beloved family member to be welcomed. The gift opening ceremony provided another unsettling moment. When Vanessa opened my carefully chosen antique silver baby cup, her reaction was noticeably different from her responses to other gifts. While she had gushed enthusiastically over designer baby clothes, expensive strollers, and high-end nursery accessories, my gift received a polite, "how thoughtful," before being quickly set aside. Several guests asked about the significance of various presents, but no one inquired about the silver cup or its family heirloom potential. More troubling was what I noticed about the other guests' gifts. These weren't just expensive baby items. They were clearly selected by people who understood Vanessa's taste and social expectations perfectly. Custom cashmere blankets, limited edition designer mobiles, and baby accessories from brands I had never heard of, but that clearly carried significant social cachet. My traditional silver cup, beautiful as it was, felt suddenly outdated and inappropriate among such contemporary luxury items. The staff service, while professionally flawless, also began to feel strange in ways I couldn't initially articulate. Servers were attentive to other guests, refilling glasses and offering canopies with the kind of personal attention that suggested familiarity with their preferences. But with me, the service felt more perfunctory, polite and correct, but lacking the subtle warmth that good hospitality professionals usually extend to all guests equally. It was as if they had been instructed to treat me differently, though I couldn't imagine why or by whom. Timothy's behavior throughout the afternoon became increasingly uncomfortable to observe. He was charming and engaged with Vanessa's friends, discussing everything from investment strategies to vacation destinations with easy confidence. But when I tried to join these conversations, he would subtly redirect them toward topics that excluded me or make comments that highlighted my outsider status. When someone mentioned a recent charity gala, Timothy quickly noted that My mother doesn't really attend those kinds of events, as if explaining why I couldn't contribute to the discussion. The most disturbing moment came when I overheard Vanessa speaking with an older woman who appeared to be a family friend or mentor figure. Timothy's mother is quite different from what we're used to, Vanessa was saying, in the tone someone might use to discuss a challenging but temporary situation. She built some kind of catering business, I think, so she's very hands-on and practical. It's an adjustment, but Timothy's worth the effort of integrating different backgrounds. The patronizing tone suggested I was a problem to be solved rather than a person to be respected. As the afternoon progressed, I found myself increasingly isolated despite being surrounded by celebration. Other guests formed natural conversation groups, sharing stories about mutual friends, discussing shared experiences, and planning future social gatherings that clearly didn't include me. I began to feel like an anthropologist observing a culture I didn't understand, where everyone except me knew the unspoken rules and social codes. The venue itself, beautiful as it was, began to feel almost oppressive in its perfection. Every detail was flawlessly executed, from the temperature control to the acoustic design that allowed conversations to flow without overwhelming background noise. It was the kind of professional event management that I recognized and appreciated from my own business experience, but being on the receiving end as an apparently unwelcome guest rather than directing the operation felt deeply disorienting. By late afternoon, I found myself questioning whether I had misunderstood my role in this family celebration. The invitation was formal rather than warm, but I had assumed that was just Vanessa's style. The interactions throughout the day suggested something more troubling, that my presence was being tolerated rather than welcomed, managed rather than celebrated. I began to wonder if my attempts to build a relationship with Vanessa had been more transparent and unsuccessful than I had realized. The final warning sign came when I was preparing to leave. Timothy walked me toward the exit, but instead of the private family moment I had hoped for, he seemed anxious to return to his guests. "Thanks for coming, Mom," he said, but his eyes were already scanning the room behind me. "Vanessa really appreciates your support." The words felt scripted, as if he had been coached on the appropriate way to acknowledge my attendance without encouraging me to linger.
As I handed my valet ticket to one of the young men managing the parking service, I caught him glancing at me with what seemed like recognition, though I couldn't place where I might have seen him before. The moment passed quickly, but it left me with an odd feeling that I was missing some crucial piece of information about this entire afternoon. Something about the venue, the staff, the way everything was being handled felt familiar in a way I couldn't explain. Driving home, I tried to shake off the uncomfortable feelings that had accumulated throughout the afternoon. Perhaps I was being oversensitive, reading too much into social dynamics that were simply different from what I was accustomed to. Perhaps Vanessa's friends weren't deliberately excluding me, but just didn't know how to connect with someone from such a different background. Perhaps Timothy's behavior reflected his desire to fit in with his new social circle rather than any embarrassment about his family. But deep down, I knew that what I had experienced went beyond simple social awkwardness. There had been a systematic quality to my exclusion, a coordinated effort to make me feel like an outsider at my own son's family celebration. I just had no idea how much worse things were about to become, or how the next phone call I received would transform my uncomfortable afternoon into something far more devastating and revealing. 3 days after the baby shower, I was still trying to process the uncomfortable afternoon when my phone rang at exactly 9:15 a.m. The caller ID showed Grandview Event Center, which confused me for a moment before I realized it must be one of my venue managers calling about business. I was in my home office reviewing quarterly reports for my other properties, so I answered with my usual professional tone. "Patricia Holloway speaking." "Mrs. Holloway, this is James Morrison, your events coordinator at Grandview," came the familiar voice of one of my most trusted employees.
James had been with me for 4 years, ever since I opened the new facility, and she was meticulous about following protocol and maintaining our reputation for excellence. His tone carried an unusual hesitancy that immediately caught my attention. "Good morning, James. What can I help you with?" "Ma'am, I need to discuss Saturday's event with you, the Thornfield baby shower." He paused, and I could hear him taking a careful breath. "There's been a situation that I think you need to know about, and frankly, I'm not sure how to handle it properly." The name Thornfield hit me like a physical blow. For a moment, I couldn't process what he was saying. My daughter-in-law's baby shower was at my venue? The beautiful event I had attended, the flawless service I had admired, the staff who had treated me with such professional distance, it had all been my own operation? "James," I said slowly, my voice barely steady, "are you telling me that Vanessa Thornfield's baby shower was held at Grandview, at my venue?" "Yes, ma'am, that's exactly what I'm telling you. And Mrs. Holloway, there's more. Something happened during the event that I've been struggling with ever since. The client, Mrs. Thornfield, she had one of our guests removed by security. She claimed the woman was disruptive and making other guests uncomfortable." My hands started shaking. The pieces were falling into place with a horrible clarity that made my stomach drop. "James, describe this guest to me." "Well, she was an older woman, maybe early 60s, well-dressed, carrying a gift. She seemed perfectly appropriate to me, very polite when I observed her interactions with staff, but Mrs. Thornfield insisted she was disruptive and demanded that we have her escorted out. She was very insistent about it, actually. Got quite agitated when I suggested we might try to resolve whatever issue there was diplomatically. I could barely breathe. What happened then?" "That's where this gets complicated, Mrs. Holloway. Mrs. Thornfield demanded to speak with the venue owner about our security policies and our failure to properly screen guests. She was threatening to leave negative reviews and demanding compensation for what she called a ruined event because we had allowed this woman to attend." The full horror of what had happened was starting to dawn on me. Not only had Vanessa booked my venue without knowing I owned it, but she had also tried to have me thrown out of my own property and then demanded to speak with the owner, me, about my own supposed misconduct. "James, what did you tell her about contacting the owner?" "I told her I would pass along her concerns and that someone would be in touch with her directly." "Mrs. Holloway, I have to ask, do you know who this guest was? Because the whole situation felt very wrong to me. The woman didn't seem disruptive at all, and honestly, Mrs. Thornfield's reaction seemed disproportionate to anything I witnessed." I closed my eyes, trying to find the words to explain this impossible situation to my employee. "James, the guest she had removed was me. I'm Timothy Thornfield's mother. I was attending my own son's baby shower at my own venue, and my daughter-in-law had me thrown out by security without knowing who any of us were." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for so long that I thought the call might have dropped. Finally, James spoke, his voice filled with a mixture of shock and outrage that somehow made me feel validated for the first time since Saturday. "Mrs. Holloway, are you telling me that we escorted the owner of this venue out of her own building because a client complained about her presence at a family event?" "That's exactly what happened, James. And apparently, after I was removed, Vanessa demanded to speak with the owner about my behavior. She wanted to complain about me to me without knowing who either of us were." I could hear James take a deep breath. "Mrs. Holloway, I owe you the biggest apology of my professional career. If I had known, if any of us had known, this never would have happened." "But how did she book the venue without knowing you owned it? And how did she not know you were Timothy's mother?" "Those are excellent questions that I'm still trying to figure out myself. Walk me through the booking process. Who made the initial contact?" "Let me pull up the file," James said, and I could hear him typing. The initial inquiry came through our website contact form about 2 months ago. The client was listed as the Thornfield, and she specifically requested our most exclusive package for a private family celebration. She paid the full amount up front by wire transfer, which is unusual but not unheard of for high-end clients who value privacy. Did she ever come to the venue for a site visit or planning meeting? No, ma'am. Everything was handled remotely. She sent very specific instructions about setup, catering preferences, floral arrangements, everything. Very detailed requirements, actually. She clearly knew exactly what she wanted and was willing to pay premium prices to get it. The total event cost was just over $18,000. The number stunned me. Vanessa had spent nearly $20,000 on a baby shower at my venue, money that came from somewhere in their household finances, possibly even money that Timothy had earned and saved for their family's future. She had chosen the most expensive venue in the county without knowing it belonged to her mother-in-law, then tried to have that same mother-in-law ejected for attending her own son's family celebration. James, I need you to tell me exactly what happened when I was removed. Who made the decision? What was the process? Mrs. Thornfield approached me directly around 4:30 p.m. She was very upset, claiming that an uninvited guest was making people uncomfortable and needed to be removed immediately. She said the woman was asking too many questions, trying to insert herself into conversations where she didn't belong, and generally being inappropriate for the level of event they were hosting. The description of my behavior was so wildly inaccurate that it left me speechless. I had been nothing but polite, had barely spoken to anyone except when directly addressed, and had spent the most of the afternoon feeling increasingly isolated and unwelcome. When I suggested we might talk to the guest first to see if there was a misunderstanding, Mrs. Thornfield became very insistent. She said this was exactly the kind of situation that distinguished high-end venues from ordinary event spaces. The ability to maintain appropriate standards and protect clients from social disruptions. She made it clear that she expected immediate action. And you called security? I did. I want you to know that our security team was very professional about it. They approached you discreetly, explained that there had been a complaint, and asked you to leave voluntarily to avoid any further disruption. You were completely gracious about it, which honestly made me even more uncomfortable about the whole situation. I remembered that moment with crystal clarity now. 2 security guards in dark suits had approached me near the coat check area, speaking quietly and respectfully. They had explained that there had been a misunderstanding and that it would be best if I left to avoid any further issues. I had been so shocked and humiliated that I had simply nodded and gathered my things, too stunned to ask questions or defend myself. What I don't understand, James continued, is how Mr. Thornfield reacted. Surely he would have objected to his mother being removed. That question cut deeper than anything else. James, Timothy didn't object because Timothy didn't defend me. He stood there and watched his wife have me escorted out of my own venue, and he said nothing to stop it. The silence on the phone was deafening. In that moment, I realized that my employee, someone I paid to work for me, was more outraged by my treatment than my own son had been. James was struggling to understand how a family member could allow such treatment, while Timothy had simply watched it happen without intervention. Mrs. Holloway, what do you want me to do about Vanessa's complaint? She's expecting someone to contact her about compensation and policy changes. For the first time since this conversation began, I felt a spark of something other than shock and hurt. It was anger, pure and simple, but also something more strategic. Vanessa wanted to speak with the owner about my inappropriate behavior at her event. She was about to get exactly what she had asked for.
James, please contact Mrs. Thornfield and let her know that the venue owner will be calling her personally this afternoon to discuss her concerns about Saturday's event. Tell her I take all client feedback very seriously and want to address her complaints directly." "Are you sure about that approach, Mrs. Holloway?" "I'm absolutely sure. It's time Vanessa and I had a completely honest conversation about what happened at that baby shower and about exactly who she's been dealing with all along." After hanging up with James, I sat in my office for nearly an hour, staring at the wall and trying to process the magnitude of what I had just learned. My hands were trembling, my heart was racing, and I felt a combination of rage, betrayal, and something else, a cold, calculating fury that I hadn't experienced since the early days of building my business, when I had to fight for every contract and every dollar. The first thing I did was pull up the booking records on my computer system. Having administrative access to all my venue's databases, I could see exactly how the Thornfield event had been processed. The digital trail told a story that was even more infuriating than what James had described over the phone. Vanessa had submitted her initial inquiry on August 15th, just 2 days after Timothy had mentioned to me during a family dinner that they were beginning to plan the baby shower. She had specifically requested the most exclusive venue available for a high society family celebration, emphasizing that money was no object and that she needed the kind of facility that would impress discerning guests accustomed to luxury events. The irony was devastating. She had researched venues extensively, reading reviews, comparing facilities, and ultimately choosing mine because it represented exactly the kind of exclusive, high-end space that would validate her social status. She had paid premium prices for the privilege of hosting her event at what she considered the finest venue in the region, never realizing that this exclusive space belonged to the woman she apparently viewed as a social embarrassment. The payment records showed 3 transactions. The initial deposit of $5,000 had been wired from an account in Timothy's name. The second payment of $8,000 had come from a joint account. The final payment of $5,200, including gratuities and additional services, had been charged to a credit card that appeared to be solely in Vanessa's name. My son and daughter-in-law had spent over $18,000 to host an event at my venue, money that could have gone toward nursery furniture or college savings for their child. But what truly stunned me was the special requests section of their contract. Vanessa had specifically asked for enhanced security protocols for the event, citing concerns about potential disruptions from uninvited guests or individuals who might not understand the exclusive nature of the occasion. She literally paid extra for security measures designed to protect her guests from people like me, people she considered socially inappropriate for her level of celebration. I called my assistant, Margaret Chen, and asked her to clear my schedule for the rest of the day. Margaret had been with me for 8 years and understood the nuances of my business operations better than almost anyone. When I explained the situation to her, her reaction was immediate and unequivocal. "Patricia, this is beyond outrageous," she said, her voice tight with anger. "I've seen some entitled behavior from clients over the years, but to have you removed from your own venue and then demand to speak with yourself about your own conduct? This woman needs a reality check that she'll never forget." Margaret's outrage helped validate my own feelings and gave me confidence that my response wouldn't be an overreaction. If my level-headed professional assistant thought Vanessa's behavior was unconscionable, then I wasn't being overly sensitive about what had happened. Together, we began planning my approach. This wasn't just about confronting Vanessa about her treatment of me at the baby shower. This was about addressing months of subtle disrespect, social manipulation, and the systematic way she had worked to diminish my role in my son's life. The venue incident had simply provided the perfect opportunity to address all of these issues from a position of undeniable authority. I decided to handle the initial contact exactly as I would any other client complaint. I would call Vanessa in my capacity as the venue owner, listen to her concerns about the inappropriate guest at her event, and allow her to fully express her opinions about my behavior before revealing my identity.
I wanted her to dig herself into the deepest possible hole before I pulled away the ladder. Margaret helped me prepare by pulling together all of the documentation from the event. We had security camera footage from multiple angles showing my interactions with staff and guests throughout the afternoon. We had written reports from the security team detailing exactly what happened when I was removed. We had the original complaint Vanessa had filed, which James had documented according to our standard procedures for handling client grievances.
Most importantly, we had a detailed breakdown of every service she had received, every courtesy extended, and every premium accommodation provided during her event. The Grandview Event Center had delivered flawless execution of an $18,000 celebration, and she was now demanding compensation because she had successfully arranged to have the venue owner ejected from the premises. I also called my lawyer, David Richardson, to discuss the legal implications of what had happened. David had handled various business issues for me over the years and understood both the hospitality industry and the complexities of family dynamics in business situations. Patricia, from a legal standpoint, you have multiple potential causes of action here, David explained. Intentional infliction of emotional distress, possible defamation if she follows through on her threats to damage your business reputation, and certainly grounds for pursuing the matter if she continues demanding compensation for services properly rendered. But David also provided the strategic perspective I needed. More importantly, you're now dealing with this from a position of complete strength. She wants to complain about you to you. She's demanding policy changes at your business to prevent people like you from attending events like hers. She's essentially handed you the perfect opportunity to address not just this incident, but the entire pattern of disrespectful behavior you've described. I spent the afternoon crafting my approach. I would call Vanessa at exactly 4 p.m., identifying myself only as the owner of Grandview Event Center, calling to discuss her concerns about Saturday's event. I would let her present her case completely, ask detailed questions about her complaints, and allow her to fully articulate her expectations for how such situations should be handled in the future. I also prepared for the possibility that Timothy might be present during the call. If he was, I wanted to see whether he would compound his failure to defend me at the shower by supporting his wife's complaints about my behavior to the venue owner. It would be a test of whether my son was simply conflict-averse or actively complicit in his wife's treatment of me. Margaret and I role-played various scenarios, with her playing Vanessa while I practiced maintaining my professional composure while listening to complaints about my own conduct. We anticipated that Vanessa might be detailed in her criticisms, possibly embellishing or exaggerating my behavior to justify her demands for compensation. Remember, Margaret advised, let her talk herself into the deepest possible corner before you reveal who you are. The more specific her complaints about your behavior, the more devastating it will be when she realizes she's been talking about her mother-in-law to her mother-in-law. I also decided to record the conversation, which was legal in our state as long as one party consented. I wanted documentation of exactly what Vanessa said about me, my behavior, and her expectations for how people like me should be handled at exclusive events. If this conversation led to broader family confrontations, I wanted an objective record of her actual words. As 4 p.m. approached, I felt a strange combination of nervousness and anticipation. I was about to have one of the most important conversations of my life with someone who had been systematically undermining my relationship with my son for 2 years. But for the first time since Timothy's marriage, I would be speaking to Vanessa from a position of complete authority and undeniable power. She wanted to speak with the owner about the inappropriate woman that had disrupted her exclusive event. She was about to get exactly what she had asked for, though I suspected the conversation wouldn't go quite the way she expected. I picked up the phone, dialed the number from their booking file, and prepared to introduce myself as the owner of Grandview Event Center, calling to discuss Mrs. Thornfield's concerns about Saturday's baby shower. Whatever happened next, I was going to finally hear exactly what my daughter-in-law really thought about me, and she was going to learn exactly who she had been dealing with all along.
At exactly 4 p.m., I dialed Vanessa's number, my finger hovering over the record button on my phone app. Margaret sat across from my desk, a legal pad ready to take notes, her expression a mixture of anticipation and barely contained outrage on my behalf. We had rehearsed this moment, but nothing could have prepared me for the actual sound of Vanessa's voice when she answered. "Hello, this is Vanessa Thornfield." Her tone was crisp and professional, the voice of someone accustomed to receiving business calls and expecting immediate deference. "Mrs. Thornfield, this is Patricia Holloway calling from Grandview Event Center. I understand you have some concerns about Saturday's event that you'd like to discuss with the venue owner." The pause that followed was brief but telling. I could practically hear her shifting into complaint mode, preparing to deliver what she clearly expected would be a devastating critique of my facility's operations and guest management policies. "Yes, thank you for calling so promptly. I have to say I'm quite disappointed in how the situation was handled, and frankly, I'm questioning whether your venue maintains the standards I was led to expect when I booked what was supposed to be an exclusive family celebration." I pressed the record button. "I'm very sorry to hear that, Mrs. Thornfield. Could you please walk me through exactly what happened so I can understand your concerns fully?" What followed was a 15-minute monologue that was more damning than anything I could have imagined. Vanessa didn't just criticize my behavior at the baby shower, she delivered a comprehensive character assassination that revealed the depth of her disdain for me and everything I represented. "The problem began early in the event," she said, her voice gaining confidence as she warmed to her subject. "There was a woman there who clearly didn't belong with our social group. She was asking inappropriate questions, trying to insert herself into conversations about topics she couldn't possibly understand, and generally making my guests uncomfortable with her, how should I put this, obvious unfamiliarity with the level of sophistication expected at an event like this." Margaret's eyes widened as she took notes. Even she hadn't expected Vanessa to be quite so explicit in her social snobbery. "Can you be more specific about what made this guest inappropriate?" I asked, maintaining my professional tone despite the fury building in my chest. "Well, for starters, her gift was completely out of place. While our friends brought carefully selected items from premium boutiques and designers that specialize in luxury baby accessories, this woman brought some kind of outdated silver thing that looked like something from a thrift store. It was embarrassing, frankly, especially when other guests noticed the quality difference. The antique silver baby cup I had spent weeks selecting, which had been appraised at over $800 and carried family significance, was being described as thrift store junk. I forced myself to remain silent and let her continue. But the real problem was her behavior throughout the afternoon. She was constantly trying to talk to people about subjects that were clearly above her understanding. When our friends discussed investment strategies, she tried to contribute as if she had any knowledge of financial planning. When they talked about recent charity galas, she acted like she belonged in those social circles. It was painfully obvious that she was out of her depth. Vanessa was apparently unaware that as a successful business owner, I had extensive experience with both financial planning and charitable organizations. But more importantly, she was revealing that she viewed my attempts at polite conversation as social pretension rather than genuine engagement. Most disturbing was how she seemed to feel entitled to special attention. She kept approaching Timothy, that's my husband, as if she had some special relationship with him. She was clearly trying to use whatever connection she thought she had to insert herself into our family celebration. It was manipulative and, frankly, quite pathetic. I had to put the phone on mute for a moment to compose myself. My own son's wife was describing my attempts to talk with him at his baby shower as manipulative, pathetic behavior by someone pretending to have a connection to their family. Did you address these concerns with the guest directly? I asked when I unmuted the call. Of course not. You don't engage with people like that directly. It only encourages them. I expected your staff to handle the situation discreetly. But when I brought it to your events coordinator's attention, he seemed hesitant to take appropriate action. I had to be very clear that this was exactly the kind of situation that distinguishes truly exclusive venues from ordinary event spaces. What kind of action did you expect? Immediate removal, obviously. People who book premium venues pay for a premium experience, which includes protection from social disruptions. I shouldn't have to explain this to someone in your industry, but apparently your staff needed education about maintaining appropriate standards. The audacity was breathtaking. She was lecturing me about hospitality industry standards while describing how she had arranged to have me ejected from my own venue for the crime of attending my son's baby shower. When the woman was finally removed, she seemed shocked, as if she couldn't understand why her behavior was inappropriate. That kind of social obliviousness is exactly why these situations need to be handled firmly. People like that need to understand that there are consequences for trying to force themselves into social situations where they don't belong. Margaret was writing furiously, capturing every damning word. Vanessa had just described my shock at being escorted out as evidence of my social obliviousness rather than the natural reaction of someone being unjustly humiliated. Now, regarding compensation, she continued, transitioning smoothly into her demands, the disruption significantly impacted our celebration. Several guests commented on the awkwardness of the situation, and I had to spend considerable time managing the social fallout instead of enjoying what should have been a perfect day. I think a 50% refund is appropriate, along with written assurance that your security protocols will be strengthened to prevent similar incidents. She wanted $9,000 back for the inconvenience of having me attend my son's baby shower, plus policy changes to ensure that people like me would be more efficiently excluded from future events.
I also think your staff needs additional training about recognizing and handling social situations. Your events coordinator seemed genuinely confused about why immediate action was necessary, which suggests a fundamental misunderstanding of what clients expect when they book exclusive venues. James Morrison, one of my most professional and experienced employees, was being criticized for his hesitation to eject a polite guest without cause. Vanessa interpreted his appropriate caution as incompetence rather than professionalism. Mrs. Thornfield, I said carefully, before we discuss compensation, I want to make sure I understand the situation completely. The guest you had removed, can you describe her again? Middle-aged woman, maybe early 60s, trying too hard to look appropriate for the event, but clearly out of her element. She seemed to think she had some connection to Timothy's family, which was particularly presumptuous. Timothy was polite to her, of course. He's too well-bred to be rude even to people who don't deserve courtesy, but I could tell he was uncomfortable with her presumptuous behavior. The description of my son as too well-bred to be rude to his own mother was perhaps the most painful moment of the entire conversation. Vanessa was praising Timothy for his restraint in tolerating my presence rather than recognizing that he had failed to defend his mother against unjust treatment. And you're certain this guest was behaving inappropriately? Absolutely certain. Look, I understand that you want to protect your venue's reputation, but this situation was handled poorly from start to finish. I've hosted and attended hundreds of exclusive events, and I know inappropriate behavior when I see it. This woman was clearly trying to social climb using whatever tenuous connection she thought she had to our family.
The moment had arrived. I looked at Margaret, who nodded encouragingly, and took a deep breath. Mrs. Thornfield, I appreciate you taking the time to explain your concerns in such detail. Before we discuss next steps, I think there's something you should know about the guest you had removed from Saturday's event. What about her? The inappropriate, socially climbing woman who was trying to insert herself into your family celebration, the one who brought the thrift store gift and made your guests uncomfortable with her presumptuous behavior. I paused, savoring the moment that would change everything. That was me. I'm Patricia Holloway. I own Grandview Event Center, and I'm also Timothy's mother. You just spent 15 minutes describing to the venue owner how you had the venue owner ejected from her own building for attending her son's baby shower. The silence that followed was so complete that I briefly wondered if the call had dropped. When Vanessa finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "What did you just say?" "You heard me correctly. I'm Timothy's mother, and I own this venue. You booked my facility for your baby shower, spent $18,000 of my son's money at my business, had me thrown out by my own security team, and then called to demand a refund because my presence at my grandchild's celebration was socially inappropriate." The sound that came through the phone was somewhere between a gasp and a whimper. Margaret was grinning broadly, pumping her fist in silent celebration of the moment we had been building toward all afternoon. "This isn't possible," Vanessa said, her voice cracking. "Timothy would have told me if his mother owned venues. He said you had some kind of small catering business." Timothy apparently understated my professional accomplishments, just as you apparently overestimated your authority to determine who belongs at family events held at venues I own and operate. The silence stretched for nearly 30 seconds before Vanessa found her voice again, and when she did, it was completely different from the confident, authoritative tone she had maintained throughout her complaint. Now she sounded small, desperate, and increasingly panicked as the full implications of what she had done began to sink in. "Patricia, I had no idea. Timothy never told me you owned venues. He said you had some kind of small catering business, something local and modest. I never would have, if I had known." "Stop," I said firmly. "Don't you dare try to backtrack now. You spent 15 minutes describing in detail how inappropriate, socially climbing, and pathetic I am. You demanded compensation for the trauma of having me attend my own son's baby shower. You criticized my gift, my conversation, my very presence at a family celebration. None of that had anything to do with not knowing I owned the venue." Margaret was frantically writing, capturing this moment when Vanessa's mask completely slipped away. We both knew this conversation would become crucial documentation of her true character and attitudes. This is all a misunderstanding," Vanessa stammered. "I was just trying to make sure the event went smoothly. Some of the guests were commenting, and I felt pressured to maintain the atmosphere we had planned for." "Which guests were commenting, Vanessa? Give me specific names and tell me exactly what they said about my behavior." The pause told me everything I needed to know. Well, it wasn't specific comments exactly, more like I could sense the discomfort in the room.
"So you invented complaints from other guests to justify having me removed. There were no actual comments, were there? It's hard to explain social dynamics to someone who, She caught herself before finishing that sentence, but the implication was clear. She had been about to say it was hard to explain social dynamics to someone like me. Let me help you understand something about social dynamics, Vanessa. I've been in the hospitality business for 30 years.
I've hosted events for celebrities, politicians, and genuine old money families that make your social aspirations look like amateur theater. I know the difference between a guest who's actually causing problems and a guest who simply doesn't fit someone's social prejudices. I could hear her breathing becoming more rapid, and when she spoke again, there was a tremor in her voice. Patricia, please, we need to talk about this as family. This has gotten out of hand. Oh, now we're family. A few minutes ago, I was a pathetic social climber trying to force myself into situations where I don't belong. Which version is the real Vanessa? I was upset. I said things I didn't mean. The pressure of hosting such an important event, the pregnancy hormones, everything just got overwhelming and I reacted poorly. Vanessa, stop lying. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. This was a calculated decision based on your genuine feelings about me and my place in your family. And frankly, your behavior at the baby shower was just the culmination of 2 years of systematic disrespect and social manipulation. Margaret passed me a note reminding me to ask about the booking process. I had prepared several questions designed to uncover the full scope of how this situation had developed. Let's talk about how you chose this venue, Vanessa. Walk me through your research process. I looked online for exclusive venues in the area. Grandview had excellent reviews and seemed appropriate for the kind of event we wanted to host. What kind of event was that, exactly? Another telling pause. A sophisticated celebration that would reflect our family's standards and social position. And those standards apparently don't include my son's mother? That's not... I never meant... You're twisting my words. I'm not twisting anything. I have a recording of this entire conversation, Vanessa. I have your exact words about my gift being thrift store quality, my conversation topics being above my understanding, and my behavior being pathetic and manipulative. These aren't twisted interpretations. These are your precise descriptions of me and my conduct. The mention of the recording seemed to panic her further. You recorded me without permission? I recorded our business conversation about your complaint, which is perfectly legal. As a venue owner, I document all client grievances for quality control and legal protection. You called to complain about services rendered at my business, so this conversation is part of my business records. I could hear her breathing becoming more labored, and she seemed to be struggling to find words. Margaret gestured for me to continue pressing for details about the broader pattern of behavior. Let's discuss the enhanced security protocols you specifically requested when booking this event. You paid extra for security measures to protect against uninvited guests who might not understand the exclusive nature of the occasion. Tell me what you were really trying to prevent. That's standard for high-end events. It's not personal. Vanessa, you specifically paid for enhanced security to keep people like me away from your celebration, then used that security to have me removed when I showed up. This was absolutely personal, and it was premeditated. No, that's not how it was. The security request was just general precaution. I never planned... You never planned what? To humiliate me? To have me thrown out? To exclude me from my grandchild's celebration? Which part didn't you plan? Her voice was barely audible now. I never planned for you to be the owner. If you had known I owned the venue, you would have been more careful how you treated me. But since you thought I was just Timothy's embarrassing mother with a small catering business, you felt safe showing your true feelings. Is that accurate? That's not fair. You're making it sound worse than it was. I'm making it sound exactly like what it was, a deliberate campaign to exclude and humiliate me based on your perception of my social status. And when you thought you could complain about me to someone with authority over me, you saw an opportunity to make sure I would be banned from future family events at this venue. The truth of this accusation seemed to hit her like a physical blow. I could hear what sounded like crying on the other end of the line. Vanessa, let me ask you directly. If I hadn't turned out to be the venue owner, if I had just been some other venue owner calling to discuss your complaint, what would you have expected me to do about Patricia Holloway's future access to this facility? I just wanted, I thought, you thought what? That you could have me permanently banned from a venue so that future family events could be held without the embarrassment of my presence? I never said that explicitly.
But that was the goal, wasn't it? Create a complaint serious enough that the venue owner would refuse to serve me in the future, giving you a convenient excuse for why I couldn't attend future family celebrations held at upscale venues. The crying was audible now, but I felt no sympathy. This conversation was revealing layers of calculation and manipulation that went far beyond a single incident of poor judgment. Patricia, please, I'm pregnant and stressed, and I just made some terrible mistakes. Can't we work this out as family? Family? You had me ejected from my grandchild's baby shower by security guards. You described me to my face as a thrift store shopping social climber who was too pathetic and presumptuous to understand appropriate behavior. You demanded financial compensation for the trauma of my presence at a family event. Exactly which part of that reflects family loyalty and respect? I was wrong. I know I was wrong. But this conversation, this recording, it feels like punishment that goes beyond what I deserve. Vanessa, this isn't punishment. This is accountability. For 2 years, you've been systematically working to minimize my role in Timothy's life, to establish yourself as the authority on our family's social standards, and to treat me like an embarrassing relative who should be grateful for whatever scraps of inclusion you choose to offer. The baby shower was just the moment when you finally revealed your true feelings publicly. What do you want from me? What can I do to fix this? It was a question I had been anticipating, and one that would determine whether this conversation led to genuine resolution or simply drove the conflict underground. But before I could answer, I heard a male voice in the background of her call. Vanessa, who are you talking to? Are you crying? Timothy had apparently come home and discovered his wife in the middle of what was clearly a distressing phone conversation. The moment of reckoning was about to expand beyond just Vanessa and me. Timothy's there, isn't he? I said. Put me on speaker, Vanessa. It's time your husband heard exactly what his wife thinks of his mother and what she's been doing to our family relationships. No, please. That will only make everything worse. Vanessa, you have exactly 10 seconds to put this call on speaker and include Timothy in this conversation, or I'm hanging up and our next communication will be through lawyers. I could hear muffled conversation in the background, and then Timothy's voice came through clearly, sounding confused and concerned. Mom? What's going on? Vanessa said there's some kind of problem with the venue? Timothy, I said, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside me, we need to have a family conversation about what really happened at your baby shower and what your wife actually thinks of me. Are you ready to hear some difficult truths? Timothy, I began, my voice carried 30 years of motherly authority. Your wife just spent 20 minutes on a recorded phone call describing to me as the venue owner why I should be banned from future events at my own facility. She had no idea she was talking to your mother about your mother. Are you prepared to hear exactly what she said about me? Mom, I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding. Vanessa would never... Put the call on speaker, Timothy, now.
Let's clear up this misunderstanding together. I heard the familiar beep of speakerphone activation, followed by Timothy's confused voice. Okay, you're on speaker, but I don't understand what's happening here. Vanessa said there was a problem with the venue? Timothy, I said carefully, let me start with a simple question. Did you know that I own Grandview Event Center? The silence that followed was so profound that I could hear a clock ticking in the background of their house. When Timothy finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. You own the venue where we had the baby shower? I own Grandview Event Center, yes. I built it from the ground up 3 years ago. It's my newest and most exclusive property. Your wife researched venues extensively, chose mine because she wanted the most exclusive facility available for a high society family celebration, and paid $18,000 for the privilege of hosting her baby shower at my venue. 18,000? Timothy's voice cracked. Vanessa, you said it cost 8,000. I could hear Vanessa crying harder now, but I continued relentlessly. Timothy, your wife not only booked my venue without knowing who owned it, she also had me ejected by security for attending your baby shower. Then she called to demand compensation for the trauma of my presence at a family event. That's impossible. Mom, you're exaggerating. There must be some mistake. Timothy, I have a recording of our entire conversation. Would you like me to play back the part where your wife describes my gift as thrift store junk? Or perhaps the section where she explains that I was pathetically trying to social climb by pretending to have a connection to your family?
Margaret was watching me intently, recognizing that this moment would determine whether my relationship with my son could be salvaged or was permanently damaged. Everything depended on how Timothy responded to evidence of his wife's true character. Vanessa, Timothy said, his voice strained, tell me this isn't true. Tell me you didn't have my mother thrown out of her own venue. The crying intensified, but Vanessa managed to speak through her tears. Timothy, I didn't know it was her venue. I thought she was just some woman who was acting inappropriately. The way she was talking to people, trying to insert herself into conversations. Stop, Timothy said, and for the first time in 2 years I heard real authority in his voice when addressing his wife. Just stop. Mom, play the recording. Over the next 10 minutes, I played selected portions of Vanessa's complaint, watching through Margaret's reactions as my son heard his wife's true opinions about his mother for the first time. The sections about my social climbing, my inappropriate behavior, my pathetic attempts to claim connection to their family, each revelation hit like a physical blow. When the recording ended, the silence was deafening. Finally, Timothy spoke, his voice hollow and shocked. Vanessa, how could you say those things? How could you describe my mother like that? And how could you have her thrown out without even talking to me? Timothy, you have to understand the pressure I was under. Your mother was making people uncomfortable, and I felt responsible for managing the situation. I was trying to protect our celebration. Protected from what? From my mother attending your grandchild's baby shower? Margaret passed me a note suggesting I explain the psychological dynamics at play. As someone who had built a business by understanding people's motivations and behaviors, I had spent considerable time analyzing what drove Vanessa's actions. Timothy, I think you need to understand what's really been happening in our family for the past 2 years. This isn't about one incident at a baby shower. This is about a systematic campaign to establish social dominance and control the narrative about our family relationships. What do you mean? Your wife has been working to redefine our family hierarchy based on her perception of social class and cultural sophistication. She's positioned herself as the arbiter of appropriate behavior, social standards, and family values.
My presence threatens that positioning because it reminds everyone that your background isn't what she wants it to be. That's not fair, Vanessa interjected weakly. I never thought those things about you. Vanessa, you literally described me as someone who couldn't understand sophisticated conversation topics, whose gift was inappropriate for your social circle, and who was pathetically trying to force myself into situations where I don't belong. Those aren't momentary lapses of judgment. They're expressions of deeply held beliefs about class, worth, and social hierarchy. Timothy's voice was strained when he spoke. Mom, are you saying Vanessa has been deliberately trying to exclude you from our family? I'm saying your wife has been managing our relationship based on her assessment of my social value versus the potential embarrassment my presence might cause in her desired social circles. The baby shower wasn't an aberration. It was the logical culmination of 2 years of subtle exclusion and social manipulation. Margaret gestured toward her notes, reminding me of the broader pattern we had discussed. Timothy, think about the past 2 years. How many times has Vanessa suggested that family gatherings be held at restaurants or venues where she could control the guest list and social dynamics? How often have you excluded me from conversations about your future plans because Vanessa felt they were private couple decisions? How many times have you found yourself apologizing or explaining away my background when interacting with her friends? The silence suggested these questions were hitting their mark. Your wife has been training you to see me through her eyes, as someone whose love and support should be appreciated, but whose social presence needs to be carefully managed to avoid embarrassment. She's convinced you that protecting her comfort level is more important than maintaining honest family relationships. I never meant to exclude you, Mom. I thought I was being respectful of Vanessa's feelings and helping everyone get along. Timothy, when your wife had me ejected from your baby shower, where were you? Another long pause. I was talking to guests. I didn't see what happened until it was over. And when you realized I had been removed by security, what did you do? Vanessa explained that there had been a misunderstanding, that I had left voluntarily to avoid any further issues.
Did you call me to check on my well-being? Did you question why your mother would voluntarily leave her grandchild's baby shower after being approached by security guards? No. I trusted Vanessa's explanation. Timothy, your wife orchestrated my humiliation and removal from a family celebration, then convinced you that I had chosen to leave voluntarily? And you accepted that explanation without question because it was easier than confronting her about her treatment of your mother. Margaret was nodding approvingly. We had identified the core psychological dynamic that had allowed this situation to develop and escalate. What Vanessa understood, and what you've been reluctant to acknowledge, is that maintaining peace in your marriage required choosing between your wife's social aspirations and your mother's dignity. You've been consistently choosing your wife's comfort over your mother's respect, because confronting her behavior would force you to acknowledge some uncomfortable truths about the person you married. That's not true, Timothy said, but his voice lacked conviction. Timothy, your wife spent $18,000 to host a baby shower at a venue specifically chosen for its exclusivity, then had the venue owner's mother ejected for being socially inappropriate. When she discovered that the inappropriate woman was both your mother and the venue owner, her first concern wasn't the devastation she had caused, but whether she could somehow minimize the consequences of her actions. I paused to let this sink in before delivering the crucial insight. Your wife doesn't respect me, Timothy. She never has. She sees me as an obstacle to the social life she wants to build with you, and she's been systematically working to minimize my influence and presence in your lives. The baby shower just provided the perfect opportunity to make that exclusion official and permanent. I don't know what to say, Timothy admitted, his voice breaking.
I love you both, and I don't know how to fix this. Timothy, I said gently, you can't fix this by trying to make everyone happy. You have to decide what kind of family relationships you want to build and what values you want to teach your child. Because this baby is going to grow up watching how their parents treat their grandmother, and that will shape their understanding of family loyalty, respect, and love. The silence that followed my words stretched for nearly a minute. I could hear Vanessa's quiet sobbing and what sounded like Timothy pacing across their hardwood floors. Margaret sat across from me, her expression grave as she recognized that we had reached the moment where words would transform into actions and consequences. "Mom," Timothy finally said, his voice raw with emotion, "I need to ask you something directly. What do you want to happen now? What would it take for our family to move forward from this?" It was a question I had been dreading, because it forced me to confront the fundamental incompatibility between my desire to maintain a relationship with my son and my need for basic respect and dignity. The honest answer was that I didn't know if those two goals could coexist while Vanessa remained in our lives unchanged. Timothy, before I answer, I need you to understand the full scope of what has happened here. This isn't just about hurt feelings or social misunderstandings. Your wife has committed what amounts to business fraud, attempted extortion, and documented defamation of character. What do you mean fraud? She booked my venue under false pretenses, specifically requesting enhanced security to protect against people like me, then used that security to have me removed and demanded financial compensation for my presence. She essentially paid me to provide services she planned to use against me, then demanded a refund when those services worked exactly as she intended. Margaret handed me a legal pad where she had been calculating potential damages and violations. My lawyer, David Richardson, had spent the afternoon preparing a preliminary assessment of our legal position. The attempted extortion involves her demand for $9,000 in compensation plus policy changes at my business based on fraudulent claims about my behavior. She threatened to damage my business reputation through negative reviews if I didn't comply with her demands for both money and permanent exclusion. I could hear Timothy's breathing becoming more labored as he processed the legal implications. "Patricia, please," Vanessa interjected, her voice desperate. "I never intended any of those things. I was just trying to manage a difficult situation." "Vanessa, stop calling it a difficult situation. You created the situation by having me removed for attending my son's baby shower. Everything that followed was your attempt to justify and profit from that decision." Timothy's voice was strained when he spoke again. "Mom, are you talking about pressing legal charges?"
Timothy, I'm a businesswoman who has spent 30 years building a reputation for integrity and professionalism. What your wife did could have destroyed relationships I've spent decades developing if the circumstances had been different. I have to consider all of my options. Margaret cast me another note, reminding me of the financial implications we had discussed. There are also significant financial considerations beyond the legal issues. Your wife spent $18,000 of your family's money at my venue, money that should have been going toward nursery furniture, college savings, or other preparations for your child. She made this expenditure specifically to create an exclusive environment that would exclude me from my grandchild's celebration. $18,000? Timothy repeated, and I could hear the shock in his voice. Vanessa, where did that money come from? We don't have $18,000 for a party. I used the money from your bonus last quarter, and I put some on credit cards. I thought it was important to make the right impression, to establish our family's position in the community. You spent my entire quarterly bonus on a party? Without discussing it with me? Timothy, you don't understand the pressure I've been under to fit in with the social expectations of your colleagues in our neighborhood. Events like this matter for our social standing, for the baby's future opportunities. I realized this conversation was revealing financial deceptions that went beyond just the venue booking. Vanessa, I said carefully, when you told Timothy the venue cost $8,000, where did you think the other $10,000 had gone? I had to cover other expenses. The dress, the flowers, the photographer, the favors for guests. Everything adds up when you want to do things properly. You lied to your husband about the cost of your baby shower, spent money you didn't have on credit cards, and justified it all by claiming it was necessary to maintain social standards that required excluding his mother? Timothy's voice was hollow when he responded. Vanessa, we've been arguing about money for months. You've been telling me we need to cut back on expenses, that we can't afford to help with my mom's birthday dinner or contribute to family gifts. But you spent $18,000 on one party? It's not the same thing, Timothy. This was an investment in our family's social position. Your mom's birthday dinner doesn't advance our standing in the community. The casual cruelty of that statement seemed to finally penetrate Timothy's defenses. I could hear something shifting in his voice when he responded. Vanessa, do you hear yourself? You're talking about my mom's birthday dinner as a bad investment compared to a party that excluded her from celebrating her grandchild? That's not what I meant. I'm just trying to explain the different priorities involved. The priority of excluding my mother from our family celebrations? I decided it was time to address the long-term implications directly. Timothy, I need you both to understand that this situation has legal, financial, and personal consequences that extend far beyond today's conversation. Professionally, I have to consider how to protect my business from clients who might attempt similar manipulations in the future. Personally, I have to decide whether I can maintain a relationship with people who view my presence at family events as something to be managed or eliminated. Margaret gestured toward the contract she had been reviewing, reminding me of another crucial issue. There's also the matter of the ongoing business relationship. Vanessa signed a contract for services at my venue, received those services in full, and is now demanding a refund based on fraudulent claims. I have to decide whether to pursue collection of the outstanding balance or write off the debt as a family loss. Outstanding balance? Timothy asked. The contract shows payments totaling $15,000, but the full service package cost $18,000. There's a remaining balance of $3,000 plus late fees that have been accruing since the event date. I could hear papers rustling and what sounded like Vanessa frantically searching through documents. Timothy, I need to make something clear. If this were any other client who had behaved this way, I would have turned the matter over to my lawyers immediately. The only reason we're having this conversation, instead of communicating through legal representation, is because you're my son, and I'm hoping we can find a way to address this within our family. What would that look like? Timothy asked. It would require acknowledgement of wrongdoing, genuine accountability rather than excuses, and concrete changes in how our family relationships function going forward. It would mean your wife taking full responsibility for her actions and their consequences, not just apologizing for how things turned out. I'm willing to do whatever it takes, Vanessa said quickly. I'll apologize publicly, I'll pay back the money, I'll do anything to fix this. Vanessa, you're still missing the point. This isn't about what you're willing to do to avoid consequences. This is about whether you understand why your behavior was fundamentally wrong and whether you're capable of treating me with basic respect going forward. Margaret pointed to a note about the broader family implications, reminding me of concerns we had discussed about future relationships. There's also the question of what this means for my relationship with my grandchild.
I've been looking forward to being an involved grandmother, but that's impossible if every family gathering becomes an opportunity for social engineering and exclusion. I need to know that I can attend my grandchild's birthday parties, school events, and family celebrations without being treated as a social liability. Of course, you can attend those events, Timothy said immediately. Timothy, your wife had me ejected from this baby shower by security guards. She spent weeks planning an event specifically designed to establish social standards that excluded me. What makes you think future events will be different unless something fundamental changes? The question hung in the air because we all knew the answer. Without genuine acknowledgement of the problem and concrete changes in attitudes and behaviors, this pattern would continue whenever Vanessa felt that my presence conflicted with her social aspirations. I need to make a decision about how to proceed, I said finally. I can handle this as a business matter, pursuing all legal remedies and treating you as I would any other client who attempted to defraud my company. I can handle it as a family matter, accepting financial losses and social humiliation in the interest of maintaining relationships. Or I can try to find some middle ground that protects my business interests while preserving the possibility of family reconciliation. What would the middle ground look like? Timothy asked. That depends entirely on whether your wife is capable of genuine accountability and whether you're willing to establish boundaries that protect our family relationships from future manipulation. The conversation had reached the point where words would transform into actions, where intentions would be tested by concrete commitments and consequences. Everything that happened next would determine whether our family could heal from this devastation or whether the damage was too severe to repair. Over the next 3 hours, my family underwent the most difficult and ultimately transformative conversation of our lives. What began as a business complaint about inappropriate guest behavior evolved into a complete restructuring of our relationships, our boundaries, and our understanding of what family loyalty actually means. Timothy asked for time to process everything he had learned, and I agreed to continue the conversation the following evening at my house, neutral ground, where we could speak honestly without the emotional weight of their home environment. Vanessa initially resisted the idea of meeting at my residence, claiming she was too upset and embarrassed to face me in person. But Timothy quietly told her that her comfort level was no longer the primary consideration in family decisions. That evening, they arrived at my house at exactly 7 o'clock. Timothy looked haggard, as if he hadn't slept, while Vanessa appeared nervous and defensive, clutching a folder of documents and what appeared to be a prepared statement. Margaret had offered to stay for support, but I decided this conversation needed to happen within the family, without witnesses or advocates. The first hour was painful, but necessary. Vanessa read a lengthy apology that hit all the right notes about taking responsibility and acknowledging harm, but it felt scripted and strategic rather than genuinely reflective. When I pressed her for specifics about what she thought she had done wrong, her answers revealed that she still fundamentally misunderstood the nature of her offense. She said, I should have been more inclusive and welcoming. I should have recognized that different backgrounds can contribute to family celebrations in meaningful ways. I should have communicated better with Timothy about my concerns instead of acting unilaterally. Vanessa, I stopped her. You're apologizing for poor communication and insufficient inclusivity. Do you understand that you had me ejected from my grandchild's baby shower by security guards, then tried to have me permanently banned from my own venue? I know it looks bad when you put it that way, but I was overwhelmed and made poor decisions under pressure. Timothy, who had been listening quietly, finally spoke up. Vanessa, stop making excuses. You didn't make poor decisions under pressure. You executed a plan you had been developing for months. The enhanced security, the exclusive venue, the social standards you kept talking about, all of it was designed to create an environment where you could exclude my mother without taking direct responsibility. Timothy's right. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. This was the culmination of a long-term strategy to establish yourself as the authority on our family's social standards and to minimize my role in your lives. The question now is whether you can acknowledge that reality and commit to fundamental changes, or whether we need to establish more formal boundaries to protect everyone involved.
What followed was the most honest conversation Vanessa and I had ever had. Slowly, reluctantly, she began to admit that her behavior had been driven by insecurity about her own social standing and fear that my working-class background would reflect poorly on the sophisticated image she wanted to project. She had convinced herself that managing my presence at social events was necessary to protect Timothy's professional reputation and their family's social advancement. I grew up believing that success meant fitting into certain social circles, she said, finally abandoning her prepared statement. When I married Timothy, I thought I was helping him access opportunities that his background might have made difficult. I saw your business success as wonderful, but I also worried that people would focus on your catering origins rather than your current accomplishments. So you decided to manage that perception by excluding me from family events? I thought I could create situations where your success would be the focus rather than your history. But somewhere along the way, I started seeing every family gathering as a social test that I had to control perfectly. Timothy looked directly at his wife. Vanessa, do you understand that you were asking me to choose between my mother's dignity and your social anxiety, and that I was weak enough to go along with it? This acknowledgement from my son was perhaps the most important moment of the entire conversation. He wasn't just recognizing Vanessa's wrongdoing, he was taking responsibility for his own failure to protect our relationship. I enabled this, Timothy continued. Every time I made excuses for why you couldn't attend events, every time I explained away your exclusion from planning conversations, every time I chose the path of least resistance instead of standing up for my mother, I was complicit in creating this situation. The conversation then shifted toward concrete changes and accountability measures. Vanessa agreed to pay the outstanding venue balance immediately and to cover all associated fees and costs. More importantly, she committed to family counseling focused specifically on understanding and changing the social dynamics that had led to this crisis. Timothy proposed what he called relationship reconstruction, a systematic effort to rebuild our family connections based on honesty rather than social management. This would mean including me in all family planning conversations, treating my input as valuable rather than something to be managed, and establishing clear boundaries about what kinds of social considerations would and wouldn't influence family decisions. Most importantly, Timothy said, I need to learn how to be a better son and a better father. This baby is going to grow up watching how we treat each other, and I want them to see family relationships based on love and respect rather than social convenience. The legal and business aspects were resolved more easily than the emotional ones. Vanessa signed a comprehensive agreement acknowledging her wrongdoing, agreeing to pay all outstanding balances and fees, and waiving any claims against my business. In exchange, I agreed not to pursue additional legal remedies, though the incident would remain documented in case future issues arose. But the real resolution came 6 months later when their son, James Timothy Holloway, was born. I was present for the birth, not because I demanded inclusion, but because Timothy and Vanessa specifically asked me to be there. The delivery room experience was everything I had hoped the baby shower would be: intimate, emotional, and focused on family love rather than social performance. The first time I held my grandson, Vanessa looked at me and said something I never expected to hear. Patricia, I'm sorry it took me so long to understand that loving this baby means loving his whole family, including his grandmother who built the foundation that made his father possible. The transformation wasn't immediate or perfect.
Vanessa still occasionally struggled with social anxiety and the desire to control family narratives, but she had learned to recognize these impulses and to communicate about them honestly rather than acting on them manipulatively. Timothy had developed the backbone necessary to prioritize family relationships over social convenience, and I had learned to be more direct about my needs and expectations rather than hoping others would intuitively understand them. 1 year after the baby shower incident, we held James's first birthday party at the Grandview Event Center. This time, I was there as both the grandmother and the venue owner, and Vanessa introduced me to guests with genuine pride in both roles. "This is Patricia Holloway," she would say, "Timothy's mother and the owner of this beautiful venue. She's the reason our family has learned so much about hospitality and grace." The event was every bit as elegant as the baby shower had been, but it felt completely different because it was built on honesty and inclusion rather than exclusion and social performance. My grandson played happily among guests who celebrated him as part of a family that had learned to value authenticity over appearance, love over social status, and truth over convenience.
Looking back now, I realize that the baby shower crisis was actually a gift, though a painful one. It forced our family to confront dynamics that had been poisoning our relationships for years and to choose between superficial peace and genuine connection. We chose connection, and while the path to healing was difficult, it led to stronger, more honest relationships than we had ever had before. My son learned to be the kind of man who protects the people he loves rather than managing them for social convenience. His wife learned that real security comes from authentic relationships rather than carefully curated social performance. And I learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to accept treatment that diminishes your dignity, even when that refusal creates temporary conflict. Most importantly, my grandson is growing up in a family that values truth, loyalty, and genuine love. Values that will serve him far better than any social connections or inherited status could. The woman who once had me ejected from a baby shower is now one of my closest allies in ensuring that he understands the importance of family bonds built on respect rather than convenience. Sometimes the most shocking revelations lead to the most profound transformations. And sometimes standing up for yourself creates the space for others to become the people they were always capable of being. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.